Good afternoon, and please take a seat. And thank you for being here in this house that the state owns and that Don and I are so fortunate to be able to live in. Thank all of you for being here. A year ago today, I took the oath of office with a vision for a better Louisiana, a Louisiana that would be a better place in which to work, to live, to go to school. My vision was simple. We were going to put Louisiana first. Now, none of us knew on that day what the year would bring in 2016. We were just beginning to realize the extent of our historic budget crisis. We didn't know that over the course of the year, 56 of 64 parishes would be declared federal disasters. We didn't yet know about the tragic shootings that would happen in July, or that we would lose 3 brave law enforcement officers to an utterly incomprehensible act of violence. But on that day, 1 year ago, from the steps of the state capitol, you heard me say that Louisiana's best days were ahead. Today, as I begin my second year as your governor, I'm going to say it again. Louisiana is now firmly on the path towards a brighter and more prosperous future, and our best days are ahead of us. Now, you might wonder, with all the challenges in 2016 that we faced, why I am so optimistic. I actually am more optimistic than I was last year, because I now have had a year to interact with the people of Louisiana and to see firsthand what we can accomplish in spite of the significant obstacles that we faced. And I just want to take a few moments today to highlight some of the good things we've accomplished together, to take a look at the challenges that we have to face as well in the year ahead. Now, tomorrow is another 1-year anniversary, and we'll celebrate one of the things that I am most proud of in my first year. In my first day in office, January the 12th, 2016, I signed an executive order to expand the Medicaid program in Louisiana. And since coverage began just 6 months ago, more than 370,000 working poor people in Louisiana have health care coverage that did not have it before, most of whom had never had it before. All because we brought our federal tax dollars home and put them to work for the people of Louisiana. Now, tomorrow, you're going to be introduced to some individuals whose lives have literally been saved because of Medicaid expansion. And in the process of doing this, we've saved the state, in the first year alone, $184 million state general fund. That's almost 10% of that historic budget deficit that we inherited. But that's not the only way that we're creating healthier families in Louisiana. In September, we announced our partnership with Our Lady of the Lake to bring a much-needed emergency room to North Baton Rouge to provide families in that community the access that they've needed for so long to emergency care right there in their community. And for the first time, thank you. For the first time in many years, we made multimodal infrastructure a priority and began addressing our neglected roads, bridges, and ports. And among the many transportation highlights from this past year is the $100 million Fast Lane grant funds that we received, the 4th highest award in the country. Now, this program was only $800 million, and we received $100 million of it, again, simply bringing our federal tax dollars home to help the people of Louisiana. We've been able to make critical infrastructure investments all across our state, and you're going to see that continue in the years ahead. And while this is a tremendous accomplishment, I am certainly aware of the fact that we have a $12 billion backlog that we have to address in terms of our transportation infrastructure. Just last week, the Transportation Task Force, which includes elected officials of both political parties, business leaders, and community leaders, made their recommendations about possible solutions to this problem, and I look forward to working with the legislature in the year to come to address those issues. I also want to report that we right-sized the capital outlay program by cutting more than $1 billion in projects out of the program because the program exceeded our bonding capacity by more than $1 billion. And we advanced only the projects to construction that we can manage from a cash flow perspective, and this required hard choices. It required making real priorities, and those priorities are obviously transportation infrastructure and deferred maintenance. And while this was a hard thing to do, it was absolutely the right thing to do. And you're going to see us be able to move forward with a more robust capital outlay program going ahead. We've also been committed to strengthening our state's economy by promoting Louisiana's attractive business climate and putting our people back to work. The Louisiana Department of Economic Development led the charge this year to secure 12 new projects for Louisiana in 10 different parishes, totaling over $21.6 billion in capital investment and more than 5,600 total new jobs. I also moved to tie the industrial tax exemption to job creation and job retention, and I've given for the first time local government a meaningful voice in how the tax exemption is going to operate in their parishes. This year, the Louisiana Workforce Commission helped 172,427 Louisianans find jobs. And we are thrilled to report that the Baton Rouge and Lake Charles areas hit all-time employment highs in October. Louisiana's healthcare industry, largely because of the Medicaid expansion, reached record employment in October as well. And we know a strong economy requires a strong, skilled workforce, which is why our incumbent worker training program will expand the skill sets of 34,584 Louisianans workers. In fact, did that in 2016, and we're working to double the more than 3,500 apprentices currently taking part of our apprenticeship partnership program. I'm also incredibly proud of the work that Secretary Joey Strickland has done along with his team at the Department of Veterans Affairs. This year, through legislation, I expanded the Military Family Assistance Fund to include veterans as well as active duty military personnel. And what this meant is, for the first time, we were able to help more than 1,000 veterans and their families with financial assistance of more than $385,000, including flood relief, to help the thousands of veterans directly affected by the August flood. We also passed legislation allowing the Secretary to negotiate, or in some cases waive, burial plot fees so that a spouse can be interred with their veteran. And beyond that, we have now staffed our parish veteran benefits offices so that all 336,000 veterans who live in Louisiana can access those officers in the parish in which they live. And we've also cleaned up and addressed the audit issues that were found in our veterans' homes in Louisiana, and now I can report to you that all 785 of our veteran home residents are receiving the top quality care and services that they deserve. Also important, we began the arduous task of stabilizing our finances after the worst budget crisis in our state's history. Naysayers will tell you that I've only proposed raising taxes. That would simply be wrong. In my first year alone, my administration made more than $850 million in painful spending cuts. We're producing honest budgets for the first time in almost a decade. The budget gimmicks of the past are gone. We are taking a responsible approach to balancing our budget while trying to protect our state's most critical services, like higher education and health care, for example. For the first time in 8 years, we were able to stabilize funding for higher education and prevent the most severe cuts in nearly a decade. And you also saw tuition at the lowest increases in a decade. But I know that's not good enough for our students and our families across the state. We're going to have to continue to do better. We have a lot of critical work ahead of us. Just this week, on Friday, the Revenue Estimating Conference is going to meet, and it's expected to identify another mid-year deficit that's going to be quite sizable and hard to deal with. And we cannot, and we're not going to live in a financial fantasy land. We're going to live in the real world. And we knew that the task of righting our ship after so many years of financial mismanagement would not be easy, and that it wouldn't happen overnight. But it starts with an honest budget, so that then we can have an honest conversation about our revenues, our expenditures, our priorities. And if we will simply work together in good faith, we are going to fully right the ship. I am not willing, however, to allow our budget problems to be balanced on the backs of our students or by sacrificing the health care of our most vulnerable citizens. This is especially important when it comes to the ability to fully fund TOPS. Now, simply put, the plan that I presented last year will have fully funded TOPS, our premier merit-based scholarship program for college students. But those recommendations were not followed through by the legislature. And by the way, the plan that I presented was not new. The recommendations weren't new ideas. In fact, experts have been saying for years that comprehensive tax reform is necessary to establish a budget with stability and predictability. And in fact, a stable budget would actually promote business investment, relocations, and job creation. So I'm again asking the legislature to continue to work with me this year on a realistic, responsible approach to solving our long-term budget problems. An approach that has now been endorsed by a task force that was created pursuant to a negotiated compromise that I had with the legislature. And that task force met for months. It's comprised of experts, and they studied the structural budget deficit that we have in Louisiana, and they made recommendations for tax reform that will create a revenue structure that is fair, stable, predictable, and sufficient. We need to move forward with those recommendations, and I will be asking the legislature to do that in April. In the coming year, flood recovery will remain a top priority. My number one desire in this regard is to have every person affected by the March or August floods back in their homes, back in their communities, back in their schools and their churches, back on their feet. On Friday, we submitted our final action plan for the first $430 million that Congress approved for federal disaster assistance to our state, more than 6 weeks ahead of the federal deadline for that plan to be filed. And we are well on our way to approving a plan for the next $1.2 billion in community development block grant funding, all ahead of them even issuing the next set of guidelines. And I will continue to work with the Trump administration, with our entire congressional delegation, and with all members of Congress of both parties and in both houses to bring home the additional $2 billion that is needed for a full and robust recovery. And looking ahead to 2017, we're also going to focus on real bipartisan approaches to criminal justice reform. We began this critical work in 2016 with the Raise the Age Act. Before this law passed through our legislature with bipartisan support, 17-year-olds were defaulted into the adult criminal justice system. But now, 17-year-olds are treated as juveniles unless there is a reason to do otherwise. And so this is important because now these 17-year-olds are going to enter the system that is age appropriate for them, and it takes into account that brain development has not fully occurred in the 17-year-olds. And while this was a good start, we have a lot more to do with our criminal justice reform. The simple fact of the matter is Louisiana has the highest incarceration rate in the nation, and there is no good reason for it, because we don't have the safest streets, we don't have the lowest recidivism in the country. And so the Louisiana Task Force on Justice Reinvestment will soon present their recommendations to safely reduce Louisiana's prison population, strengthen probation and parole supervision in the community, and reinvest savings into evidence-backed prison alternatives. These are things that have been done in other southern conservative states that have produced positive results, and we can do them here. We spend $600 million a year on our correction system, third only to healthcare and education. Our crime rate is very similar to that of South Carolina and Florida, and yet in Louisiana, we put twice as many people in prison as South Carolina and 3 times as many in prison as Florida. We can do better. And by saving money that we can then reinvest into reentry programs, education, mental health, we will stop the pipeline that we currently have where too many of our citizens are entering prison and the revolving door where they simply go out in order to come back in. This year, we're also going to adopt a revised coastal restoration master plan. We're undergoing the 5-year revision right now. And this plan is going to responsibly allow science to drive a resource-constrained plan so that we get the biggest bang for our buck and that we protect our coast and restore our coast by advancing quickly those projects that give us the most bang for our buck. Before you leave here today, in the approximate hour that you've been here in total, Louisiana will have lost another football field-sized piece of land to coastal erosion. This is a top priority. So for 365 days, Donna and I, along with our family, have been honored to call this place our home. We are humbled to serve the most resilient, the hardest working, most generous, and decent people in the country. A year ago, I said that if there's 2 things we'll never run out of in Louisiana, it's gumbo and gumption. I've eaten a lot of gumbo this year, and I've seen a lot of gumption. But little did I know how much that sentiment would be tested over the course of my first year in office. But I stand by that assertion now more than ever. I've seen the best that our state has to offer. I have seen how over and over again, even in the most challenging circumstances, one Louisianan's bond with another cannot be broken. Not by water, not by gunfire. That bond is as thick as steel, and it's certainly stronger than what would divide us. So as we stand together, even in the most trying times, and help each other out, we should be proud to call Louisiana home. And we should be more committed than ever to making sure that the future of Louisiana, the future of our kids and grandkids, is better here in Louisiana than they could ever find anywhere else. That's why we have to face every challenge that comes our way. You know, I told you about that breeze of hope that got us to where we are today. In every community meeting in the aftermath of the shooting of Alton Sterling, and the memorials of slain law enforcement officers, and even as I toured the state meeting with community officials and homeowners after the devastating floods, I saw that resilience. It inspires me every single day. And I still feel that breeze of hope. It's what wakes me up in the morning, simply the desire to make our state the best it has ever been. It is that desire from so many people across the state to continue to put Louisiana first that truly motivates me. And I share it with you each and every day. So the spirit of Louisiana is alive and well, and from the bottom of my heart, I can't thank the people of this great state enough for the opportunity that I have to serve, and I cannot thank the people in this room who are part of my administration enough for all of the work that you have given and that you've put in to make our state a better place. And for the legislators who are here today and the local elected officials, we are going to continue to work together. And we're going to make this state all that we want it to be. I will not let you down. So God bless you, and God bless the great state of Louisiana.